The cabin lights dimmed softly as the aircraft leveled off at cruising altitude. Somewhere above the clouds at 32,000 feet, the soft hum of the engines filled the silence, and most passengers were settling in for the long flight. In seat 13C, a woman sat quietly, eyes focused on the window, hands folded neatly on her lap. She didn't speak much, didn't move much either. To the casual observer, she was just another passenger, but there was something about her, something that felt out of place, like she didn't quite belong there. Her jacket was plain, her shoes well worn, and her hair tied back in a tight, simple braid. She looked calm. But her eyes kept scanning the sky, not the cabin. Every now and then, she would glance quickly around her, at the seats, the overhead bins, the cockpit door, almost like she was checking things off in her mind. No one noticed, not really. People were busy with movies, snacks, and idle conversation. 13C was just another seat, and she was just another face. A little boy across the aisle dropped his toy car, and she leaned over, picked it up, and gave it back with a soft smile. The boy giggled, thanked her, and forgot her just as quickly. The flight attendants made their rounds, handing out drinks and tiny packets of pretzels. When they reached her row, she shook her head politely, refusing both. Her hand stayed still on her lap, except when she reached under her seat once to adjust the strap on her backpack. She didn't look nervous, just watchful. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached our cruising altitude. 32,000 feet, he said in a calm voice. Smooth skies ahead. There was a light round of polite claps, and then everyone went back to what they were doing. But the woman in 13C stayed still, her posture straight, her eyes scanning again. Her phone sat off in her pocket, untouched since boarding. No music, no video, no book. Just that same stare out the window, watching the vast open sky, and then it happened so fast most people didn't even notice. A shadow flicked across the clouds, a flash of metal, a jet, moving far too fast to be part of commercial air traffic. It flew past the aircraft's right side, close, too close. She blinked once and turned away from the window. Her face no longer soft, now she was fully alert, her muscles slightly tensed. She reached under her seat again, this time slower, more deliberate. The passengers around her were unaware. Some looked out the windows, confused at the blur they thought they saw. Some laughed, thinking it was their imagination. But the woman in 13C knew better. That jet wasn't supposed to be there. Not on that flight path, not at that speed. She looked down the aisle toward the cockpit door. Two flight attendants were chatting near the galley, laughing softly. No alarms, no announcements, nothing. She stood up, just for a moment, and walked toward the lavatory, moving casually. But before entering, she paused, glanced behind her, and looked again out the small cabin window. Her breath caught in her throat, the same jet, now pacing the plane, holding position near the wing like it was watching. Then it pulled up sharply, disappearing into the sky. She closed the lavatory door behind her, locked it, and quickly reached into her coat. There, beneath the lining, hidden from any scanner, was a small folded patch, a patch with a call sign not seen in public for over a decade. She stared at it, fingers trembling just slightly. They found her. Or worse, someone on board triggered them. She took a slow breath, splashed cold water on her face, and steadied her hands. This wasn't part of the plan. This wasn't supposed to happen, not anymore. Not after all these years. When she returned to her seat, she no longer looked like a quiet traveler. There was something sharper in her presence now, a storm brewing beneath the surface. The engines hummed louder for a moment, the plane adjusting course slightly. She felt it in her bones. This wasn't just turbulence, something had changed, and she needed to figure out what. Fast, back in her seat, she unzipped her bag just enough to slide her fingers inside. She felt the old metal clasp, still there, still waiting, whatever was happening. She knew one thing for sure. She couldn't just sit quietly in 13C anymore, not if that jet returned. Not if someone else on this plane wasn't who they seemed to be. At 32,000 feet, the sky was quiet again, but inside that aircraft, everything had started to shift. And she was at the center of it, whether she liked it or not. The woman in 13C didn't sleep. She couldn't. Every sound felt louder. Every movement sharper. She stared straight ahead, pretending to be just another tired traveler. But her mind was racing, connecting dots she hoped were wrong. The appearance of that jet wasn't a coincidence. It flew like it knew exactly where this plane was, and exactly who was on it her years ago. She walked away from that world. She burned the code, erased her record, and disappeared. But you can't erase everything. Not when you're carrying information no one else was supposed to survive with. Her fingers touched the fabric patch in her jacket again. A small piece of cloth with 3 symbols. It wasn't just a call sign, it was a key. Someone on this plane triggered a response. Or someone below realized this route passed over restricted airspace. But that wasn't her fault. She booked this flight using a fake name, a clean ID, and had cleared all systems. She hadn't even brought her real phone, only a satellite tag. Disconnected. Shut off, buried deep in her backpack lining. So why was a high-speed military jet tailing a commercial flight? Unless it wasn't about her. Unless someone else on board was watching her. 2. A seatbelt light blinked on with a chime. Mild turbulence, the captain said over the intercom. His voice sounded steady, but she heard the slight pause before he spoke. Something had shaken him. She opened the seat pocket slowly, pretending to pull out the airline magazine. Instead, she unfolded a narrow strip of thermal paper she had written on before boarding. Flight manifest notes, row numbers, seat assignments. Boarding times, she cross-checked it again. Seat 17A. Man in suit, but shoes scuffed. Didn't take his jacket off even once. Seat 9F. Young woman with too many bags. Kept adjusting her smartwatch like it wasn't telling time. Seat 23D. Old man. Nothing odd. Except he hadn't blinked much since takeoff. She had marked them earlier just in case, but now she had to consider the worst. One of them may have sent the signal, or they were waiting for her to make the first move. That jet could have been confirmation, not a threat. It was watching, waiting, testing. She slowly rose from her seat again and walked back toward the lavatory. But this time she didn't go inside. Instead, she waited near the back galley, pretending to stretch. A flight attendant smiled at her, offering her a bottle of water. She accepted it, returned the smile politely, and then whispered, "Has the captain said anything to the crew, anything unusual?" The attendant tilted her head. "No, why do you ask?" The woman nodded, just curious. Something felt off. She took the water and returned to her seat. Now she knew. Nothing had been reported officially. That jet hadn't contacted the pilots directly. No transponder, no radio, meaning it was shadowing silently. Not as a military response, but as a warning. She glanced across the aisle, and this time she locked eyes with someone. A man in 14D reading a book but not turning a single page. His eyes had flicked to her one too many times since they boarded. He blinked slowly when she looked at him, then shifted his focus to the window. A trained move, she knew that kind of control. He wasn't a regular passenger either. She tapped her seatbelt, making it seem like she was just adjusting it. But under the flap, she pressed 2 fingers together and held them there. A hidden pressure strip inside the seam of her belt sent out a silent frequency. No sound, no light, just a signal, encrypted. Short range, untraceable. Only a handful of people in the world could even recognize it, and if one of them was on this plane, they would react, not in panic, not loud, but with a sign. She waited, counting her breaths. 1 minute passed, 2, then 3. Then the man in 14D stood up, calmly walked to the front, and entered the lavatory, but when he returned, he had left a folded napkin on the seat tray of 13C. She opened it slowly, carefully. Under her magazine inside were just 4 numbers, and her old call sign written in ink she hadn't seen in years. They knew exactly who she was, and they were no longer hiding whatever was coming. It wouldn't stay quiet for long, and at 32,000 feet, she was now trapped between the sky, a ghost from her past, and a threat still unfolding. The numbers on the napkin wouldn't leave her mind. They weren't random. They were coordinates, but not for a location. They marked time, a timestamp, a window. She had used this format in covert field drops during the blackout years. Whoever left this wanted her to remember something specific, something about that exact moment in time, a time she'd promised herself she'd never revisit. She kept the napkin folded and tucked it deep into her travel guide. To anyone else, it would look like a tourist pamphlet. She shifted her weight in the seat, tilting just enough to see the man in 14D again. He wasn't looking at her anymore. He was pretending she didn't exist. That meant he was trained, not just some rookie handler, no. This was someone who had operated in the field before. She knew the type because she used to be one, but she had never seen him before. Not in any of the old files, not in briefings. Either he was new to the net, Or worse, they had started recruiting again. Her fingers tightened around the water bottle cap as the cabin lights dimmed for night mode. The hum of the aircraft deepened, signaling the descent into evening. She had no choice now. She had to respond, not to the man but to the message, and the message was clear. Her silence was no longer enough. Something was happening down there on the ground, and she was being pulled back in. The memories came in fragments: a cold bunker, a table filled with photographs, children missing from border zones, encrypted data traded like currency, and a name she hadn't spoken aloud in years: Zia. The name attached to the operation no one ever declassified. The mission they buried with a dozen unmarked graves and sealed documents, and now somehow someone wanted her to relive it. She closed her eyes, let her breath slow, then, as if casually stretching, she opened the backpack again. There, under a false bottom, was a hidden strip of photo film. She had carried it with her for 5 years. A backup of the only evidence she'd ever smuggled out. No scanner could detect it, but if anyone on board knew it existed, they'd kill to get it. Was that what this was? A retrieval? But then why the jet? Why now? Unless someone else on the ground had broken the silence first, that would mean her file had been reopened. That would mean... Zia was still alive. Suddenly a flicker on the cabin screen. Static. Just for a second, it was enough to get her attention. Passenger monitors rarely glitched at this altitude. She looked up and caught a subtle flick of the cabin lights. A silent code, 3 pulses, pause 2. It was the old distress signal. Someone else on this plane had seen her trigger and was responding. She sat perfectly still, not reacting. But her heart was beating faster now. There was another player in this game, not the man in 14D, not the jet, someone else entirely. And they were close enough to access the aircraft's internal system. That meant crew. She scanned quickly: flight attendants, cockpit crew, maybe even the engineer seated near the back galley. Whoever it was had just told her, "I see you." But not in warning, more like recognition. Then she noticed something strange. The young woman in 9F, the one who kept adjusting her smartwatch, was gone. Her seat was empty. She hadn't gone to the restroom, because the sign still said vacant. Her bags were there. But she wasn't. That made no sense unless she was never supposed to be a passenger. Unless she had boarded with a purpose and was now somewhere she shouldn't be, like near the avionics bay. Or worse, the cockpit. The woman in 13C didn't wait. She reached under her seat again and pulled out a folded case the size of a glasses pouch. Inside, a small, flexible lens no larger than a fingernail. She slid it discreetly onto her contact lens. Suddenly, the plane's interior glowed with a faint overlay, infrared signatures lighting up like candles in the dark. She scanned the rows quickly. Everyone was visible except one spot. Forward cabin, behind the bulkhead panel. A void. No heat signature, no movement, just a space that should have been empty but wasn't. She inhaled sharply. Someone had breached the front panel, and that wasn't standard recon. That was a threat. The clock was ticking. And at 32,000 feet, there were no exits, only choices, only consequences, and only one chance to stop whatever was coming next. The cabin was quiet, but her mind wasn't. The glowing lens over her right eye tracked body heat, pulse shifts and movement, data hidden to normal eyes. Rows 10 through 24 showed warm silhouettes of passengers, breathing, sleeping, or quietly watching movies, except for the void behind the cockpit bulkhead. It wasn't a glitch. Someone was there, deliberately shielded. That kind of thermal dampening wasn't cheap, and definitely not legal on commercial flights. Whoever had disappeared from seat 9F hadn't gone to the restroom. They had gone forward, with intent. She reached down and tapped a sequence on the buckle of her backpack. The false bottom clicked silently open, revealing a slim titanium strip. Inside, a foldable transmitter no bigger than her palm. She hadn't used it in 6 years, not since the last time her past had chased her out of a safe house in Kiev. But now the past wasn't chasing, it was standing up front. Masked in silence and possibly armed, she unfolded the transmitter carefully under her sweater. No lights, no buzz, just a pulse frequency set to bounce off orbiting satellites without leaving a trace. She typed 2 words, confirm void, and the old call sign, Firebird. The signal launched. She waited, counting each breath like she was back in training. 7 seconds later, a return signal blinked. 1 word came back, negative. There should be no cloaked agent on board. She wasn't on any mission. No ops were active, no friendly tags registered. This meant only one thing: rogue asset. She stood slowly and made her way toward the rear galley. The flight attendant on duty glanced at her but didn't say anything. She stepped into the narrow space and pressed her hand flat against the panel beside the galley door. A faint click opened a maintenance compartment. Most people didn't know it existed. She pulled out a wire-thin headset and looped it around her ear. It would feed her pilot chatter directly from the cabin comms. Static filled her ear for a few seconds, then voices. "Yes, Control. We have no reported anomalies on radar." It was the co-pilot, calm but uncertain. "Roger," maintaining altitude, and wrote, "No visual confirmation of the object reported by traffic control. Object, they saw the jet or something else?" That explained the earlier pause in the captain's voice. They knew something strange was out there but had no explanation. She was tired of waiting for one, returning to her seat. She typed one more phrase into the transmitter. Activation code Shadow 13. It was a high-risk call, a dead protocol she never thought she'd use again. But now she needed backup. Confirmation from someone who wasn't flying blind. It would alert one person on the ground, a retired field handler known only as Lockwell. If he was still alive, he'd respond, and if he didn't, she was on her own. 5 minutes passed. The plane's engines rumbled gently. Nothing had changed visually, passengers still unaware. But her lens showed movement near the cockpit door now. That invisible space had shifted, expanded. Whoever was hidden up there wasn't staying still anymore. They were preparing for something. Suddenly, a ripple moved through the plane. It was subtle, like the air pressure shifted for a moment too long. Then a soft, almost unnoticeable sound from the front. A pop. Like suction releasing. Her body reacted before her mind did. She grabbed her seat, unzipped her bag halfway and braced, and then the lights flickered. Not cabin lights, but the emergency strip along the floor. They blinked once, twice, then stayed off. She felt the tension thicken like fog. And then the message came, not from Lockwell, not from the transmitter, but on the overhead screen. Someone had hacked the in-flight video feed. It went black for a moment, then a phrase appeared. Flight path override initiated. Her heart dropped. That phrase didn't belong to any civilian system. It was military code, black level clearance only, and it meant someone, maybe the woman from 9F, was trying to take control of the aircraft's route. She stood without hesitation, moving down the aisle quickly but calmly. People looked at her, confused, but she gave them no reason to panic. If she ran, others would follow. If others followed, chaos would break, and in chaos, whoever was behind this might make their move faster. As she reached row 3, the cockpit door clicked open, and a figure stepped out. Not the pilot, not the co-pilot, but the woman from 9F, now dressed in all black, no trace of tourist left. Her eyes locked with the woman from 13C, and for the first time since boarding, they both saw each other clearly. No more hiding, only two paths now, fight or fail. The woman from 13C stood still, her heart beat loud but her face calm. The woman from 9F, no longer hiding behind soft smiles or civilian clothes, blocked the aisle. She wasn't holding a weapon, not yet, but she didn't need to. Her body language said it all, dominant, focused and unafraid. The rest of the cabin was quiet, unaware of the pressure building just behind the curtain of routine. Movies played, babies slept, a couple argued softly near the rear. Life moved normally, but at the front of the aircraft a silent war had begun. The woman in black tilted her head slightly and whispered, "You still wear the lens, Firebird." That word again, Firebird. A code name she hadn't used in years, a name she swore she buried, now spoken so casually like it never left. She narrowed her eyes, stepping closer. "You're not sanctioned," she said coldly. "There's no active op," the woman in black smiled. "There is now." Behind them, a crew member approached with a nervous look. The woman from 13C waved him off with a calm hand. "Bathroom line," she said softly. The crew nodded and backed away. Every second mattered now, and every word between them was a move on the board. "You hijacked the in-flight system," the woman accused. "I redirected it," the other replied. "There's a difference." The woman in 13C took a half step forward, lowering her voice. "What's your endgame?" The reply came quick and sharp. "You." Silence filled the narrow space between them. Not a threat, not a joke, just truth. "I didn't run," the woman said quietly. "I walked away because I was done with the games." "Then why are you still carrying that film strip?" The question sliced through her, because that film contained everything: faces, coordinates, proof of what happened in the black facility beneath the eastern ridge. Proof that would destroy more than just names. It would shake governments. She had kept it in case truth was ever needed. But no one had ever come for it until now. The other woman leaned in, lowering her voice. "You're the last living thread of Project Echo. That thread was cut years ago. Not completely." Her voice softened. "They're rebuilding it, Firebird. And they're not using soldiers this time." The words hit like cold steel. Rebuilding? Project Echo had been a disaster. Forced implants, memory wipes, children trained to kill before they turned 10. They had shut it down, or so she thought. "Why tell me this now?" she asked. "Because someone in command believes you still have the key." "I don't. But you remember where it was buried." That was the truth. She had memorized the old vault coordinates and wiped them from every digital trace. Only 2 people knew the path to it. One was dead and the other was her. And now she knew exactly why the jet shadowed them earlier. It wasn't for protection. It was an escort, discreetly guiding the plane into foreign airspace, a place where extraction could be made without legal noise. She glanced at the cockpit. The override protocol had likely rerouted them already. No one on board would know until they began descent. "You're not walking off this flight," the woman in black whispered. "Not until I get the coordinates." She didn't blink. "You think I'll give that up midair?" "I think you're tired," she replied. "Tired of hiding? Tired of protecting something no one even remembers?" "That's where you're wrong." Her fingers slid into her jacket pocket and pressed a hidden button. A vibration pulsed in the transmitter strapped under her sleeve. It had sent a second ping to Lockwell, a silent SOS. If he received it, someone on the ground would know where this plane was going, and who was trying to disappear with her. The woman in black noticed the movement, subtle as it was. Her eyes narrowed. "You already called for help." "I always have a backup plan." A flash of annoyance crossed the other's face, but it faded just as fast. She leaned back, nodding toward the cockpit. "Then I guess we both wait." "For what?" "For the descent," she said calmly. "And for you to realize I'm not your enemy." That confused her. If not mine, then whose? The woman didn't answer. She simply stepped back into the cockpit and closed the door behind her. And just like that, the aisle was empty again. Passengers unaware, flight attendants smiling. But everything had changed. The game was no longer spy versus spy. It was bigger, deeper, and it was moving too fast for comfort. She returned to her seat, staring out the window once more. But now the sky didn't feel wide. It felt like a trap closing around her. And 13C had just become the most dangerous place on the plane. The seatbelt light flickered again. But this time it wasn't turbulence, it was preparation. Descent. The woman in 13C sat perfectly still. Her lens still active, her transmitter now silent. No reply had come from Lockwell. Not even a coded response. Which meant either her signal was jammed, or someone intercepted it before it ever reached him. She looked out the window, her eyes following the faint curve of the horizon. They were no longer over the Atlantic, that much she knew. The landmass far below was unfamiliar, sparse and dry. Desert. Not the kind you cross on the way to Europe. This was southern. Unmonitored. The type of place where military bases don't show up on maps. The cabin crew smiled, made their rounds, asked passengers to prepare for arrival. Arrival where? She pulled out the safety pamphlet, hiding her handwritten notes beneath. She quickly scribbled a phrase in disappearing ink. Redirected. Possible extraction. Then, as a flight attendant passed, she subtly dropped it into the seat pocket of 11A. An older woman sat there, half asleep. She wouldn't notice. But someone on the ground would. That seat had been booked under an alias connected to a dormant observer network. If anyone was watching, they'd find that message. If not, then she saw it. Outside her window, far off in the clouds, the jet was back. It wasn't tailing anymore, it was guiding. Wings tilted in slight angles, shifting air currents to move the plane gently off its original course. A quiet hijack. She blinked slowly, trying to steady her thoughts. What was waiting at the bottom of this descent? Not customs, not security. It would be men in unmarked uniforms. Or worse, faces from old files she thought were long gone. And the woman from 9F was still inside the cockpit, probably giving instructions that had nothing to do with landing gears or weather conditions. Suddenly her lens flared. A heat spike rear of the plane near the galley. Someone else had just stood up. Someone masked. No signature face. Just a thermal outline wrapped in a thin wave of cold. A portable suppressor. Whoever it was had blocked their body heat from regular view. But not from hers. She tapped her wrist once, disabling the lens, too dangerous to keep it active now. She needed to look ordinary again, invisible. The plane tilted slightly more than usual. Passengers stirred. Some looked out the windows. A few noticed the desert. Someone murmured, "This doesn't look like Lisbon." She knew the panic would build soon. But she didn't need chaos, yet she needed timing. She leaned forward, stretching like a traveler waking from a nap. But under the motion, she unzipped her carry-on just a little further. Inside, next to the film strip and transmitter, was a curved metal ring. It looked like a bracelet, but when activated, it became a defense field, enough to jam localized signals for 30 seconds, just enough to make a move or vanish. She had used it once before. In a marketplace filled with sand and smoke, it bought her enough time to escape when a drone marked her head with a red dot. Now it might be her only way to shift the odds. Then something happened. The intercom came on. But it wasn't the captain. It was her. The voice of the woman from 9F. Now cool and formal. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to an unexpected shift in weather, we'll be making a brief landing for refueling. Lies. The stop is temporary and safe. Please remain seated and calm." Lies again, refueling in a desert. There was no airport beneath them. No visible runway, no lights, just flat sand and shadows. This wasn't an emergency landing. This was an extraction zone. Her fingers tightened around the ring inside the bag. This was it, one decision: she could wait. Get pulled into whatever facility waited below. Or she could move now, disappear between the chaos and the dust. But just as she prepared to stand, a voice behind her whispered, "Don't." She turned slowly. The man in 14D, the one with the book, now stood beside her row, and in his hand was a badge, old, scratched, but real. One she hadn't seen in over a decade. Agency seal, blackened by age. "You're not alone in this," he said quietly. Then he slid a keycard into her jacket pocket and walked back without another word. Her world spun. Someone had been watching her the whole time, not to stop her, but to help. The question was, help her do what? Escape? Destroy the data? Or expose something far bigger than even she had guessed? As the landing gear dropped and the wind roared louder outside, one thing became clear. This wasn't just about her past. This was about something still alive, and whatever it was, it had finally come looking. The landing gear thudded open beneath the plane, but there were no city lights waiting below, only sand, wind, and shadows stretching endlessly across the desert. The woman in 13C felt the weight of the keycard the man had slipped into her jacket. She hadn't seen his face before. But the badge, that badge wasn't forged, it was old issue, and only given to deep cover agents before the purge. And if he was here now, that meant someone else inside the old network had broken silence. As the aircraft dropped altitude, the sky outside turned gold with heat haze. The rogue jet was gone, but now 4 military-style utility vehicles moved below, kicking up dust. No official markings, no flags. They were waiting at the edge of a makeshift strip, a rough landing zone carved into hard earth. This wasn't a detour, it was a planned stop. And the pilot wasn't in control. The woman from 9F was. The seatbelt light blinked off. Passengers stirred, confused. Some looked out the windows and began to murmur, "This isn't an airport. Where are we?" She stayed still. She couldn't move too soon. Panic would blow her chance. Too late, and she'd vanish into one of those vehicles, never to be seen again. Then came the voice over the intercom. "This is for your safety," the woman said. "Please remain seated and prepare for temporary disembarkation." A lie wrapped in calm words. There would be no temporary about it. They'd offload her, suppress the rest, and no one would ever know what happened on Flight 709. The plane touched down, tires skimming dust instead of tarmac. It rumbled, bounced, slowed, and finally rolled to a stop. Doors didn't open, not yet. She slipped the bracelet ring over her wrist and waited. She knew how much time the jamming field would give her. 30 seconds. It wasn't a fight, it was a disappearance. A choice to leave the game on her terms. Not theirs, but just as she reached for her bag, the cockpit door opened and the woman from 9F stepped out. Calm, Collected, she walked halfway down the aisle, and without raising her voice, she said, "Seat 13C. Please come forward." Every passenger turned. Eyes narrowing on her, the woman stood slowly. This time she didn't hide, no tricks, no codes. She looked the other woman straight in the eye and spoke clearly. "I'm not going anywhere with you." Gasps rippled across the cabin. Confusion broke into murmurs. The woman from 9F didn't flinch, but she didn't smile either. "You have no idea what's waiting below," she said softly. "I know it's not justice," the woman replied. "It's not safety either." The two stared at each other, decades of secrets and shadows hanging between them. "You think you're protecting something," the woman from 9F said. "But you're not." "You're right," the woman in 13C replied. "I'm protecting someone," and then she moved. Fast, she tapped her wrist, jamming field on. The lights flickered, comms dropped. The flight systems blinked for just a moment, enough for distraction. She lunged sideways, grabbing her bag. Passengers screamed, ducked, some stood. Panic had arrived, and she disappeared into the rear galley before anyone could stop her. The woman from 9F followed, but she was too slow. By the time she reached the rear hatch, the emergency door had been forced open. The heat from the desert blasted in, dust swirled. Alarms blinked uselessly, suppressed by the jammer outside. One vehicle broke formation, then turned sharply away. Someone was driving it. The man from 14D stood near the door, not stopping her escape but buying her time. He faced the woman from 9F and calmly said, "She's done running, just not in your direction." The plane's interior exploded in shouting, flashing lights and sirens, but she was gone, vanished into the open desert, bag still with her, keycard safe. And inside it, still sealed in film, was the proof that Project Echo never really died, only changed names as she drove into the rising sun. The bracelet shut off, signal returned, and somewhere far away, Lockwell's voice finally crackled through the old transmitter. "Firebird? Status?" She smiled faintly. "Wheels down, ghost in the wind," she said, then threw the device out the window because some stories don't end. They just disappear into the dust. And 13C, it remained empty on every future flight manifest, but some say, when the wind hits just right, a figure can be seen walking the edge of the runway, waiting for the next time the sky calls her back.